Okay, we're working on the third section in Chapter 3, and it's entitled Making Decisions, and it really is another one of those real important programming approaches. And I don't know if you remember me saying this earlier, and it was probably in one of last week's videos or the week preceding, that when you write computer programs, there's three basic approaches to writing code. One is step-by-step, that's called sequence. We just learned in the previous video how to do loops, that's repetition. And then there's also decisions. So those are like the three basic programming concepts that you can write just about any type of program with those approaches. Now, when we were running the loops in the previous section, and we had those little expressions in there that we would check for true and false to see if the loop would run, decision statements work exactly the same way. So what you're going to see as a general rule is that we'll have a word like if, that's the one that we use most often. We check to see if the condition is true or false. If it's true, we execute the statements inside the if statement. Simple as that. If you do your homework, you can have dessert. Okay, that's an example of a condition, right? And if you have children, you probably set those conditions on your children all the time. If you want an A, you best do all your homework perfectly, right? We're real close. All right, let's go back to our document here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create some code. And I would like to get it in the right spot. Now, I'm not going to copy all these lines. I'm going to add the closing curly brackets manually. We'll see how that goes. And it says within the data block for the for loop, inside of add game info, insert a new line before the final statement. And we're going to drop this in. So before the final statement. So add game info right here. And I think I copy pasted too much because that's a repeat, obviously. So we're throwing in an if statement. This is just not cooperating with me here. I'm going to put a curly bracket there. So it should look like this. Inside that if statement, we're going to drop in this little piece of code. All right, let's talk about what this is going to do here. It's going to check every time this loop runs if game location I. Now remember, game location is an array, and we're going to be stepping through that array one position at a time. And if whatever's in that position in the array, if it happens to be equivalent to away, and notice not just equal, which is regular equivalency, it's equal. That means it has to be exact. It has to say away in all lowercase, just like that. In that situation, the inner HTML for the first paragraph is also going to have an @ symbol inserted plus a space. So that way, basically what they're doing is if it's an away game, they're putting an @ sign in front of what it's the team that they're printing out. Because it will still add to the paragraph. But I'm going to tell you, I think that they're probably going to have us alter that code. See, there's a plus equal. So, because otherwise, if I did this statement here, it would just erase the @ altogether. Plus equal will append to it the opponent's name. So what it's going to do if it's an away game, it's going to print @ space and then the team name. But it's only going to print the @ if it's an away game. All right, so they want us to save it and run it. So let's save it. Let's go back to the browser. And let's do a refresh. So you can see all the away games now have @ in front of them. So that part worked just fine. And then notice it says we're going to add a little bit more code. All right. It says then immediately after the closing bracket for the if statement, we're going to add another if statement. So just copy that whole thing. So right after this if statement, we're going to paste in this one. So it's going to do a second check to see if the location is at home. Instead of an @ at the beginning, it's going to put a VS, versus, at the beginning. Save your work, go back to your browser and refresh. And you can see all the home games now have the little VS in front of them. Days that are off are still marked off. All right, here's a completed version if you want to just double check your code. I like that they do that here in the book. So even if you're following step by step, and we've already looked at it so we know that it works. Now sometimes you write if statements, and if one condition is true, you do it, right? But in some cases, if a condition's not true, you need to do something else. So they have a statement called else, and notice the format. So here they're checking to see the variable today is Tuesday. If today is Monday, we write Monday. Else, we write today is not Monday. You get how that works? I mean, it's pretty simplistic, really. All right, so let's add that. And notice what they're having us do now is the code that we just took all that time to create, they're having us put comment marks around it. So follow what I do. I'm going to put in a /*, jump down here to the end of that statement and do */. Notice how it turns green. So it's not going to read that code anymore. Now we're going to change that and write the first part of an if statement. Looks just like this one. I'm not sure why we have to rewrite it, but that's what the author's having us do. And then we're going to add an else to it. And really, more proper format is to have the else on a separate line. So it's saying if it's an away game, you still put the @ in there. Otherwise, put the verses in there. Does anybody see a problem with that scenario? What if it's an off day? So I'm not sure why he's doing that. I think it's just to demonstrate if else. So this is what your code should look like, right? Comment. All right, let's go ahead, save your work, if not already. Back to the browser, and once again, refresh. See the problem I identified? Little flaw in logic. Now, I know where he's going with this, because it's very much the same kind of approach I use when I'm teaching. Sometimes I lead you astray intentionally. Right? So really we have a third scenario to consider. Right? And let's see if my guess is right. All right. What they're showing us now is what we call a nested if statement. So an if statement that we try to execute if the if statement that holds it is true. If you do your homework, okay, homework done, true. If you clean your room, then you can play video games. If you do your homework and you don't clean your room, there's no video games. See the difference? But we're only going to check to see if your room is clean if your homework's done. Maybe that's not very good logic. That's not a great example, but so here is an example. The sales total is 75. If the sales total is greater than 50, then do this. Well, what they're going to do is check to see if it's less than 100, which it is. So then they're going to say the sales total is between 50 and 100 because it absolutely is. All right, that's the example. Okay, it says within the add game info function, add a new line below the code and then enter the code like this. So it should look like this. So we're going to have an if statement wrapping the verses. So inside this else, we're adding an if. This is going to be the statement inside that if. And then let's just check the logic real quick. If it's an away game, we put the @ sign in front. Otherwise, if it's a home game, we add the VS in front of it. But if it's not a home game, it does nothing. So it fixes the scenario that we were having a problem with. Okay, let's save it and check it. Do a Control R to refresh, and now those are gone in front of the off days. It's a nice little simple example that he has there, and I think he did a nice job with it. Now there's also another way to accomplish the same thing, because if you notice in this code, we have an else statement, and then there's an if after it. Well, somebody said, well, if we're doing an else and then an if, why don't we just create an else if? So it's a second condition check. So really, we can replace that, and I'm guessing that that's what he's having us do next. I'm like racing ahead. Is that part of the next command here? No, let's just follow along with what he's doing. All right, here it's giving you a little thing about Internet Explorer 8. So really his next example, and really, let me just backtrack a second so I don't lose you guys. Really what he's saying here with the else if is I could actually take this if, put it here, get rid of that curly bracket there, and the statement like this still works. It's checking a second condition, just doing it in a different way. Right, the next thing that they're going to have us do is, it says, notice, if you have access to Internet Explorer 8, open the calendar and you're going to see that Internet Explorer 8 doesn't recognize this event listener. This shouldn't be an issue for us, and as a result of that, I'm not going to feel obliged to write this code. Because really what it's saying is, like, if window add event listener, that's kind of a weird statement, but basically it's saying that if it can operate, write the code just the way it is, right? Otherwise, we have to put on a different type of action. I am skipping this code because, frankly, folks, we don't really need to worry about Internet Explorer 8 at this point. Even Microsoft is saying bye-bye, okay? And so should you. If you are writing for that environment, you'll know to do this because it won't work any other way. All right. I think the last thing that he's going to have us do here is what we call a switch statement. And with the switch statement, what I'm going to do, just to kind of truncate this and make it a little shorter, is first I'm going to explain what it does. And then we'll look at a really quick example, and then we'll basically be done with all of our lecturing for the semester. Isn't that wonderful? All right, so what we have going on here is he's created a function, and inside that function we have a switch case statement. Now, if you're writing a whole bunch of code, and you have a series of if statements where you might say, if state equals Wisconsin, do this. Else, if state equals Illinois, do this. Else, if state equals, well, you can do that 50 times over, right? And that becomes kind of an inefficient structure. If you're doing a whole bunch of if, else, or else if, excuse me. So what they came up with is this thing called a switch that basically does the same thing. So what you're going to do with the switch is you're going to grab a certain value of some sort. Usually it's a variable. And then it goes through and it checks. What's the city? Is it Boston? Well, if it's Boston, return this value. And then if it's Chicago, return this value, and so on and so forth. But then also notice that there is a break, so that as soon as it hits that one condition, it jumps out, doesn't keep checking. There's no reason, if you hit the first one, to check the other 49. Make sense? All right, and then whenever you do a case statement, you can also add to the very end of it a default. So if none of the conditions hit, you return something else. So if the case was New York and it returns New York, well, that's great. But what if it, we're putting in, Milwaukee? That's certainly not on the list. So what's it going to return? United States. Right, folks, I think that's all we're going to do. I think that's enough of an explanation. That's just another form of doing decision making. We've covered a lot of stuff in the course. We've even gotten pretty good way into JavaScript, at least a great primer on it. So when you guys take your formal dynamic elements course and your graphics dynamic elements course and just about every HTML-based course, you guys are going to repeat a lot of these same concepts. All the array stuff, decision stuff, loop stuff, that is present in every language. In some languages, the syntax is just about identical. So if you're comfortable with this, or at least kind of familiar with it when we move to another language, you'll be doing great. All right, folks, that's it. It's been a fun semester.